Hi everyone, this is Arvind from MindMajix, and today I welcome you all to this amazing video on DBMS interview questions. Okay, so guys, the subject of DBMS is very important. No matter like if you're a fresher or an experienced candidate, having good knowledge of DBMS will always help you crack software engineering roles or software development roles and so on. And we have been receiving a lot of requests from our viewers as well around this topic. So we decided to come up with a video that will cover each and every question that is important for you to clear your upcoming interview. Okay, so this is the whole idea, or you can say the agenda for this particular video. Okay, so without any further delay, let's get started. Okay, so guys, initially we'll be covering a lot of basic questions, and as we progress further in this particular video, we will increase the complexity and the difficulty of the questions as well. Okay, so this same thing happens in the actual interview as well. Okay, so we're going to follow the same thing. So the first, foremost, and a very basic question is, what do you mean by data? So data is stored facts. Okay, so you can call data like data can be anything from numbers, words, measurements, observations, or even just description of things. Okay, so let's just take an example. Let's suppose your height is 5.5 feet. Okay, and your weight is 70 kgs. So this is also a data. Okay, so data can be anything, like anything which gives a particular description of a thing or an event or an object. So anything that is describable, like the description of a particular entity, is nothing but a data. The next question is, what do you mean by information? So information is that which informs, that from which data can be derived. Okay, so from data you get information. Okay, and information is conveyed either as content of a message or through direct or indirect observation of something. For example, the average score of a particular subject is the information that can be concluded from the given data. Okay, so let's suppose you have marks of students of a particular class. Okay, and if you come up with an information like the average marks for a particular subject of 10 students is 70. So this is the information that you have derived from a data that is available to you. Okay, so when you process the data, that's where you get the information. The next question is a very simple question. What is a database? So in simple words, database is a collection of data in some organized way to facilitate its users to easily access, manage, and upload the data. A database is an organized, consistent, and a logical collection of data that can be easily accessed, updated, and managed. Database mostly contains set of tables or objects and it consists of records and fields. So a tuple or a row represents a single entry in a table. An attribute or a column represents the basic unit of data storage which contain the information about a particular aspect of the table. So DBMS extracts the data from a database in the form of queries given by the user. The next question is, what is DBMS and RDBMS? Okay, so if you talk about DBMS, so DBMS stands for Database Management System. So this particular DBMS is a software for storing and retrieving users' data, and for this you have to consider appropriate security measures. Okay, so the database management system has to be secure, and this system is composed of a number of programs that manipulate the database. It accepts the request for data from an application and instructs the OS or the operating system to provide the specific data. And if you talk about the popular DBMS systems, so here you can consider file systems, XML files, Windows registry as DBMS. And now if you talk about RDMS, which stands for Relational Database Management Systems, so this is a software system that stores only data that needs to be stored in related tables. So in RDBMS, data is managed and stored in rows and columns known as tuples and attributes. The next question is, why is the use of DBMS recommended, and explain by listing some of its major advantages. So definitely the use of DBMS is recommended, and there are a few reasons for this particular recommendation, and these are also the advantages of using DBMS. The first point over here is controlled redundancy. So DBMS supports a mechanism to control the redundancy of data inside the database by integrating all the data into a single database. And as data is stored only at one place, the duplicity of data does not happen. The next point is data sharing. So sharing of the data among multiple users simultaneously can also be done in DBMS, as the same database will be shared among the users and by different application programs. The next point over here is backup and recovery facility. So DBMS minimizes the pain of creating the backup of data again and again by providing the feature of backup and recovery. So this particular feature automatically creates the data backup and restores the data whenever required. The next one is enforcement of integrity constraints. So integrity constraints are very important to be enforced on the data so that the refined data after putting some constraints are stored in the database, and that is followed by DBMS. And last but not the least, the major advantage is independence of data. So it simply means that you can change the structure of the data without affecting the structure of any of the application programs. So for these particular reasons, it is always recommended to make use of DBMS wherever possible. The next question is, what do you mean by SQL? So SQL stands for Structured Query Language, and the main purpose of SQL is to interact with the relational databases in the form of inserting and updating or modifying the data in the database. Okay, so SQL is a query language, and there are different flavors of SQL that are available in the market, or you can also call them the RDBMS, such as you have MySQL, you have Postgres, then you have Oracle, you have MS SQL, which is from Microsoft, and so on. The next question is, explain different languages present in DBMS. So guys, as you can see on the screen, these are the 4 types of languages which are available in DBMS. The first one is the DDL, or the data definition language. So it contains the commands which are required to define the database. Okay, so as the name suggests, DDL, or the data definition language, means the commands that you can use to define the database. And what are those commands? So those commands are create, alter, drop, truncate, rename, and so on. Then you have the DML, or the data manipulation language. So it contains commands which are required to manipulate the data which is already present in the database. And those commands are select, update, insert, delete, and so on. Next, you have the DCL, or the data control language, and it contains the commands which are required to deal with the user permissions and control of the database system. And what commands do you have over here? So here you have grant and revoke commands. And last but not the least, you have the transaction control language, or the TCL. So it contains the commands which are required to deal with the transaction of the database. Okay, so here you have commands such as commit, rollback, and save point. The next question is a very important question. The question says, what is a transaction and what is meant by ACID properties? A database transaction is nothing but a set of database operations that must be treated as a whole, which means either all operations are executed or none of them are executed. So for this, you can consider an example of a bank transaction. Let's suppose you have to transfer funds from one account to the other account. So here the transaction must be either fully successful or unsuccessful. Okay, and if you talk about the ACID properties, so here ACID stands for atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. So in DBMS, these are the properties that ensure a safe and secure way of sharing data among multiple users. Okay, and now if you talk about atomicity, so it means that all the changes to the data must be performed successfully or not at all. So that's what we saw in the previous example of a bank transaction. Then you talk about consistency. So the data must be in a consistent state before and after the transaction has occurred. Then you have the isolation. So this means that no other process can change the data while the transaction is taking place or the transaction is being executed. And last but not the least, we will talk about durability. So this means that the changes made by a transaction must persist throughout the database. The next question is, what are indexes? So database index is a data structure that improves the speed of data retrieval operations on a database table at the cost of additional writes and the use of more storage space to maintain the extra copy of data. So data can be stored only in one order on the disk, and to support faster access according to different values, faster search like binary search for different values is desired. And for this purpose, indexes are created on tables. So these indexes need only extra space on the disk, but they allow faster search according to different frequently searched values. And guys, the next question is basically an extension to the previous question. So in the previous question, we saw what are indexes, and now the question says what are clustered and non-clustered indexes. So clustered indexes are the indexes according to which the data is physically stored on a disk. So therefore, only one clustered index can be created on a given database table. Whereas if you talk about non-clustered index, so these don't define the physical ordering of data, but they are more sort of a logical ordering. So typically a tree is created whose leaf points to the disk records. So here you can use B trees or B plus trees for non-clustered indexes. The next question is, what is normalization in DBMS? So database normalization is the process of organizing the attributes of the database to reduce or eliminate the data redundancy. So we have seen already what do you mean by data redundancy. So data redundancy means having duplicate data. Okay, and it is not at all a good practice to keep duplicate data in the DBMS. The data must be unique and it must be consistent throughout the DBMS. The next question is, what is the purpose of normalization in DBMS? So there are a few reasons or purposes of normalization. So first is, it is used to remove the duplicate data and the database anomalies from the relational table. The next point is, normalization helps to reduce redundancy and complexity by examining new data types used in the table. After this, it is helpful to divide the larger database table into smaller tables and link them using relationships. After this, normalization avoids duplicate data or non-repeating groups into a table. And last but not the least, it reduces the chances for anomalies to occur in the database. The next question is, what is denormalization? So denormalization is a database optimization technique in which we add redundant data to one or more tables. So guys, basically denormalization is exactly the opposite of normalization. And there are a few instances where we need to use denormalization as well. Okay. The next question is, what do you mean by a database schema and a database state? So the collection of information stored in a database at a particular moment in time is nothing but a database state. Whereas if you talk about database schema, so this is nothing but the overall design of the database. Okay. So I hope you guys have understood what is database schema and the database state and the difference among them. The next question is, what is a view in SQL and how do you create a view? So a view is a virtual table based on the result set of an SQL statement. And if you talk about creating a view, so for this, you can follow the syntax as you can see on the screen. So the syntax is very simple. So you have to write a statement where you write create view and then you specify the view name and then you use the keyword as, and after this you have to write the select columns, the columns that you want to select, or if you want to select all the columns, you can write select star from table name where condition. Okay, so guys, I hope you must have understood how do you create a view in SQL. The next question is, what are the uses of view? So views can represent a subset of the data contained in a table, and consequently a view can limit the degree of exposure of the underlying tables to the outer world. For example, a given user may have the permission to query the view while denied access to the rest of the base table. So views can join and simplify multiple tables into a single virtual table, and views can act as aggregated tables where the database engine aggregates data and presents the calculated results as a part of the data. Views can also be used to hide the complexity of the data, and views take very little space to store, and the database contains only the definition of the view and not a copy of all the data which it presents. And last but not the least, depending on the SQL engine that is used, views can provide extra security to the DBMS as well. The next question is, what is identity? So identity or auto number is a column that automatically generates numeric values. So a start and increment value can be set, but most DBA admin guys leave this value to 1. So a GUID column also generates numbers and the value of this cannot be controlled. So identity or GUID columns do not need to be indexed. The next question is, what is QBE? So QBE basically stands for query by example. So this basically represents a visual or a graphic approach for accessing the information in a database through the use of query templates called skeleton tables. So it is used by entering example values directly into a query template to represent what is to be achieved. So QBE is used by many database systems for personal computers. So QBE is a very powerful facility that gives the user the capability to access the information a user wants without the knowledge of any programming language. So queries in QBE are expressed by skeleton tables, and QBE basically has two distinct features, such as QBE has two-dimensional syntax and queries look like tables. The next question is, what are the different levels of abstraction that are available in DBMS? So guys, there are basically three levels of abstraction that are available in DBMS, and they are physical level, logical level, and the view level. So if you talk about physical level, so this is the lowest level of the data abstraction, which states how the data is stored in the database. And now if you talk about the logical level, so this is the next level of data abstraction, which states the type of data and the relationship among the data that is stored in the database. And the next level is the view level. So this is basically the highest level in the data abstraction, which shows only a part of the database. So if you talk about the top to bottom hierarchy, so on the topmost you have the view level, then in between you have logical level, and at the bottom you have the physical level. The next question is, what is ER model in the DBMS? So ER model is also known as the entity relationship model in DBMS, which is based on the concept of entities and the relationship that exist among these entities. The next question is, what is a functional dependency in DBMS? So this is basically a constraint that is useful in describing the relationship among the different attributes in a relation. For example, if there is some relation R1 which has two attributes such as Y and Z, then the functional dependency among these two attributes can be shown as Y, then you have the arrow, and then you have the Z, which states that Z is functionally dependent on Y. The next question is a very important question. So the question says, what are the different types of relationships in DBMS? A relationship in DBMS states an association between the tables, like how the tables are related to each other, if at all they are related. And for these, you have different types of relationships, such as one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. For one-to-one relationship, this basically states that there should be one-to-one relationship between the tables. That is, there should be one record in both the tables that is related. If you talk about one-to-many relationship, so this states that there can be many relationships for one, that is, a primary key table hold only one record which can have many, one, or none records in the related table. Then you have the many-to-many relationship, and this states that both the tables can be related to many other tables. The next question is, what are the differences between drop, truncate, and delete commands? So guys, basically drop and truncate commands are the DDL commands which are used to delete the tables from the database. And once the table gets deleted, all the privileges and indexes that are related to the tables also get deleted. Okay, and these two operations cannot be rolled back. And so one should use it only when it is necessary. So what do I mean by this? So I mean that drop and truncate commands are permanent. You cannot recover the data which gets dropped or truncated once you use these commands. Now, if you talk about the delete command, so that is basically a DML command, which is also used to delete rows from the table, and this can be rolled back. So what do you mean by rollback? So you can reverse the operation that you can perform by using the delete command. And the only one thing that you must note over here is that it is recommended to use the where clause along with the delete command, else the complete table will be deleted from the database. The next important question is, explain the concepts of a primary key and a foreign key. So primary key is used to uniquely identify the records in the database table, while foreign key is mainly used to link two or more tables together, as this is a particular field in one of the database tables, which is the primary key of some other table. Okay, so just to give you an example, let's suppose there are two tables, employee and department. So both these tables have a common field or a common column such as ID, where ID is the primary key of the employee table, while this is the foreign key of the department table. So in the actual interview as well, you can give various other examples or other examples that you already know, which are related to primary key and foreign key. The next question is, what integrity rules exist in the DBMS? So there are two major integrity rules that exist in the DBMS. The first one is the entity integrity and the second one is the referential integrity. So if you talk about entity integrity, so this states that a very important rule that the value of a primary key can never have a null value. We have already seen what is a primary key in the previous question. So the entity integrity only states that you cannot have a null value for a primary key. And now if you talk about referential integrity, so this rule is related to the foreign key, which states that either the value of a foreign key is a null value or it should be the primary key of any other relation. So these are the rules which are related to the integrity in the DBMS. So guys, now let us move to the next question. And the next question says, explain different types of keys in a database. Okay, so in the previous questions, we have already seen what is primary key and foreign key. Now we will have a look at the candidate key. Okay, so the candidate key represents a set of properties that can uniquely identify a table. Okay, so each table may have multiple candidate keys. So one key amongst all candidate keys can be chosen as the primary key. Okay, so this was a quick definition of candidate key. And now if you talk about super key, so the super key defines a set of attributes that can uniquely identify a tuple or a row. A candidate key and the primary key are subsets of the super key. In other words, super key is their superset. Okay, so guys, if you talk about the super key, candidate key, and primary key, so at the base we have primary key, and its superset is candidate key, and its superset is super key. Okay, so super key topmost of all, then we have the candidate key, and then we have the primary key. Okay, so this is the hierarchy that you should remember. And now if you talk about the unique key, so the unique key is very similar to the primary key, except that primary keys don't allow null values in the column, but unique keys allow them. So essentially a unique keys are primary keys with null values. So this is a very simple way to remember the unique keys. So only the difference between unique key and primary key is that unique key allows null values and primary key do not allow null values. Then we have the alternate key. So all the candidate keys which are not chosen as primary keys are considered as alternate keys. Okay, and last but not the least, we have the composite key. So a composite key refers to a combination of two or more columns that can uniquely identify each tuple in a table. Okay, so these were some of the definitions about keys that you must remember. So just a quick recap of what we have already seen. So we saw primary key and foreign key in the previous questions. And in this particular question, we saw candidate key, super key, unique key, alternate key, and composite key. Now let's move to the next question. So the next question says, what is the difference between primary key and unique constraints? Okay, so have a look at the wordings over here. The difference between primary key and unique constraints. It is not about unique key. Okay, so the primary key cannot have null value and the unique constraints can have null values. So there is only one primary key in the table, but there can be multiple unique constraints. The next question is, what is the difference between a trigger and a stored procedure? So a trigger is a code associated with the insert, update, or delete operations. So the code is executed automatically whenever the associated query is executed on a table. Triggers can be useful to maintain integrity in the database. So this was all about trigger. And now if you talk about stored procedures, so this is like a function that contains a set of operations that are compiled or combined together. It contains a set of operations that are commonly used in an application, and it is done for some common database tasks. So the difference here is, unlike stored procedures, triggers cannot be called directly. They can be only associated with queries. So this is a very important difference between a trigger and a stored procedure. The next question is, what is a clause in terms of SQL? So if you talk about clause, so this is used with the SQL queries to fetch specific data as per the requirements on the basis of the conditions that are put in the SQL statements. So this is very helpful in picking up the selective records from the complete set of records. Okay, so if you have a large data, or you can say if you have large number of rows, and among them, if you want to pick only a few or a handful rows based on some condition, then you can use the clause in your SQL queries. So clause is nothing but a condition that you want to specify as per your requirements. So this will significantly reduce the query execution time because you do not have to load all of the rows. You just want to pick a handful among them. So just to give you an example here, there is a query that has a where condition or the query with the having clause. Okay, so these are the two things that you must remember in terms of clause for SQL, having and where. The next question is, what is a live log? So live log situation can be defined as when two or more processes continuously repeat the same interaction in response to changes in other processes without doing any useful work. So these processes are not in the waiting state and they are running concurrently. So this is different from a deadlock because in a deadlock, all the processes are in the waiting state. So guys, you must remember the difference between a live log and a deadlock. The next question is, why are cursors necessary in embedded SQL? So a cursor is an object used to store the output of a query for row by row processing by the application programs. SQL statements operate on a set of data and return a set of data. On the other hand, host language programs operate on a row at a time. So the cursors are used to navigate through a set of rows returned by an embedded SQL select statement. So a cursor can be compared to a pointer. The next question is, what is the main difference between union and union all? So union and union all both are used to join data from two or more tables, but union removes duplicate rows and picks the rows which are distinct after combining the data from the tables, whereas union all does not remove the duplicate rows. It just picks off all of the data from the tables. The next question is, what is the concept of subquery in terms of SQL? So a subquery is basically the query that is included inside some other query and can also be called as an inner query, which is found inside the outer query. So in simple words, when you have to write more than one queries in the same statement, then you have to use the concept of subqueries. The next question is, what is a correlated subquery in DBMS? So a subquery is also known as a nested query, and it means that a query is written inside some other query. So when a subquery is executed for each of the rows of the outer query, then it is termed as a correlated subquery. The next question is, explain entity, entity type, and entity set in DBMS. So the entity is an object or a place or a thing which has its independent existence in the real world and about which the data can be stored in the database. Okay, so for any entity, you can have the description or the data, which can be either character or a numeric value. Okay, and these values you can store in the databases. So just to give you a real world example of entity, so an entity can be anything like a person, a book, an event. Okay, and now if you talk about entity type, so it is a collection of entities that have same attributes. Just to give you an example, the student table contains the rows in which each row is an entity holding attributes like name, age, roll number, and hence student is an entity type that holds the entities having the same attributes. And now if you talk about entity set, so this is a collection of entities of the same type. For example, an employee table of a particular firm can have the employee details of the people that are working in that particular firm. The next question is, what is 1NF in DBMS? So 1NF is known as the first normal form. So this is the most easiest form of the normalization process, and this states that the domain of an attribute should have only atomic values. The objective of this is to remove the duplicate columns that are present in the table. The next question is, what is 2NF in the DBMS? So 2NF is the second normal form, and now any table is said to have in the 2NF if it satisfies the two conditions. And what are those conditions? So table should be in the first normal form, and then each non-prime attribute of a table is said to be functionally dependent in the totality on the primary key. So these are the two important conditions for the 2NF or the second normal form. After this, the next question is, what is 3NF in the DBMS? So 3NF is the third normal form, and any table is said to be in the third normal form if it satisfies the two conditions. The first condition is the table should be in the 2NF and The second condition is each non-prime attribute of a table is said to be non-transitively dependent on every key of the table. The next question is, what is BCNF in the DBMS? So BCNF basically stands for Boyce Codd Normal Form, and this is more stricter than the 3NF. So any table is said to be in the BCNF if it satisfies the two conditions. The first condition is the table should be in the 3NF, and the second condition is for each of the functional dependencies, that is X is related to Y that exists, X is the super key of a table. The next question is, how is pattern matching done in the SQL? So with the help of the like operator, pattern matching is possible in the SQL. And for this, you use the ampersand sign with the like operator when it matches with the 0 or more characters, and an underscore is used to match the one particular character. The next important question is, what is a join in SQL? So a join is one of the SQL statements which is used to join the data or the rows from two or more tables on the basis of a common field or a column among them. And now the next question is an extension to the previous question. The question says, what are the different types of joins in SQL? So guys, there are basically four types of joins in SQL. First one is the inner join. So this type of join is used to fetch the data among the tables which are common for both of the tables. So inner join and join are one and the same thing. The next join is left join. So this particular join returns all of the rows from the table which is on the left side of the join, but only the matching rows from the table which is on the right side of the join. Then you have the right join. So this returns all of the rows from the table which is on the right side of the join, but only the matching rows from the table which is on the left side of the join. And last but not the least, you have the full join, and this returns the rows from all of the tables on which the join condition has been put, and the rows which do not match and hold the null values as well. The next question is, what do you mean by entity type extension? So entity type extension is compilation of similar entity types into one particular type which is grouped together as an entity. So this is a simple definition of entity type extension. The next question is, what is conceptual design in DBMS? So conceptual design is basically the first stage in the database design process. So the goal at this stage is to design a database that is independent of database software and physical details. So the output of this process is a conceptual data model that describes the main data entities, attributes, relationships, and the constraints of a given problem domain. The next question is, what are temporary tables and when are they useful? So temporary tables exist solely for a particular session or whose data persists for the duration of the transaction. So the temporary tables are generally used to support specialized rollups or specific application processing requirements. So unlike a permanent table, space is not allocated to a temporary table when it is created. So space will be dynamically allocated for a table as rows are inserted. So the create global temporary table command is used to create a temporary table in the Oracle database. The next question is, what is the main goal of RAID technology? So RAID basically stands for redundant array of inexpensive disks. So RAID is basically a method of combining several hard disk drives into one logical unit. So RAID technology was developed to address the fault tolerance and performance limitations of conventional disk storage. So it can offer fault tolerance and higher throughput levels than a single hard drive or a group of independent hard drives. So while arrays were once considered complex and relatively specialized storage solutions, today they are easy to use and essential for a broad spectrum of client-server applications. The next question is, what is data warehousing? The process of collecting, extracting, transforming, and loading data from multiple sources and storing them in one place is known as data warehousing. So data warehouse can be considered as a central repository where data flows from transactional systems and other relational databases and is used for the purpose of data analytics. So data warehouse comprises a wide variety of an organizational historical data that supports the decision-making process in an organization. The next question is, explain the difference between two-tier and three-tier architecture in DBMS. So the two-tier architecture refers to the client-server architecture in which the application and the client directly communicate with the database at the server without any middleware involved. So just to give you an example of the two-tier architecture, so you can consider the example of contact management system that is created using MS Access or the railway reservation system. And now if you talk about the three-tier architecture, so this contains another layer between the client and the server to provide the GUI to the users and make the system much more secure and accessible. So in this type of architecture, the application present on the client end interacts with an application on the server end, which further communicates with the database system. So the example of a three-tier architecture is you can consider designing registration form which contains a text box, label, button, or a large website on the internet. And one more real-time example of a three-tier architecture you can give in the actual interview is the sign up for any social networking site. Let's say if you talk about the sign up process of Facebook. Okay, so for signing up on Facebook, what you can do is what you have to do is you have to enter your credentials like username, password, okay, and email ID. So once you enter these details and you sign up, these details will be stored at a particular location and you can log in using those credentials. So just the signing up process, the GUI part was the extra layer between the client and the server. So guys, with this, we have come to the end of this session on DBMS interview questions. I hope you guys have enjoyed this session and we tried to cover maximum questions which are possible related to DBMS. If you have any doubts or queries related to this session, then you can write them in the comment section and my team is here to help you resolve all your queries as soon as possible. So guys, thank you so much for being with us and I wish you all the very best for your upcoming interview.